The Galactic Council chamber hummed with the kind of barely controlled panic that only comes from watching your entire civilization get its collective rear end handed to it by a bunch of overzealous lizard people with daddy issues. Ambassador Clexon of the Rigelian Commonwealth adjusted his ceremonial robes for the 15th time in 3 minutes, his 6 eyes darting nervously between the holographic displays showing yet another system falling to the Zephyrian Empire. The numbers were not encouraging. Actually, that was putting it mildly. The numbers were about as encouraging as a meteor heading straight for your homeworld. Esteemed colleagues, Clexon began, his voice carrying that particular tone of someone trying very hard not to admit they were completely screwed, that we must face the unfortunate reality that our combined fleets have suffered what military strategists would diplomatically call a comprehensive tactical disadvantage. They're getting slaughtered, interjected High Commander Vex Tar from the Andromedan Defense Force, her crystalline form crackling with frustration. Let's not dress it up in fancy words. The Zephyrians are carving through our forces like they're made of space butter. The hologram flickered, showing the latest casualty reports. 3 more systems had fallen in the past cycle, their defenders scattered to the solar winds faster than you could say unconditional surrender. The Zephyrian Empire, led by their megalomaniacal emperor Thraxon, had apparently decided that universal conquest was a perfectly reasonable hobby. Council leader Mordun, a being whose species had evolved past the need for a sense of humor approximately 3 million years ago, cleared his throat with the sound of grinding asteroids. The Zephyrian military doctrine appears to be both ruthlessly efficient and utterly predictable. They overwhelm defensive positions with superior numbers, establish orbital superiority, then systematically eliminate all resistance. Predictable, yes, agreed Admiral Zerfon, whose fleet had been on the receiving end of said predictable tactics just last week. Predictably devastating. They've got more ships than we have ammunition, and they're not particularly concerned about casualties. The chamber fell silent except for the soft hum of life support systems and the occasional nervous chittering from the insectoid delegation. Everyone knew what came next in the conversation, but nobody wanted to be the first to say it. Finally, Ambassador Clexon spoke the words that made half the assembly physically recoil. Perhaps it is time to consider contacting the humans. The reaction was immediate and visceral. Several delegates actually hissed. The Proximan representative made a sound like a deflating balloon. Even the usually stoic Mordun's eye stalks drooped in what could charitably be called disgust. The humans? Commander Vex Tar's crystalline form flickered red with indignation. Those barbaric primates from the Outer Rim? They've barely achieved faster than light travel, and their idea of diplomacy involves explosions and something they call aggressive negotiations. Council leader Mordun raised a manipulator appendage for silence. While the human species is admittedly primitive, crude, and possesses an alarming tendency toward violence, intelligence reports suggest they have achieved remarkable success in their limited military engagements. Remarkable success, scoffed Admiral Zerfon. They turned the Kepler mining dispute into a 3-system conflict over what they called mining rights, but what was clearly just an excuse to blow things up. And they won, Mordun pointed out with the kind of logic that makes everyone uncomfortable. The silence stretched longer this time. The tactical displays continued their grim countdown of falling systems. The Zephyrians weren't slowing down, and the combined fleets of the Galactic Council were running out of ships, planets, and increasingly, options. Ambassador Clexon's voice was barely above a whisper. They are our only remaining potential allies with any significant military capability. Potential being the operative word, muttered Commander Vex Tar. For all we know, they'll take one look at this situation and decide the Zephyrians make better neighbors than we do. But the writing was on the wall, or in this case, blazing across multiple star systems in the form of Zephyrian conquest fleets. The Galactic Council, in all its pompous, bureaucratic glory, was about to do something that would have been unthinkable just a few cycles ago. They were going to ask the humans for help, and they were going to regret it. Admiral Marcus Tank Thompson was having what he generously called one of those mornings when the alien distress signal arrived. His coffee was cold, his desk was buried under reports about budget allocations for new torpedo designs, and his assistant had just informed him that the Senate Defense Committee wanted another presentation about humanity's overly aggressive expansion policies. Then his communication officer burst through his office door with the kind of expression that suggested either first contact or the end of the world. Possibly both. Sir, you need to see this. We're receiving a transmission on the old Proximan diplomatic channels. It's from something called the Galactic Council. Tank set down his coffee with the deliberate care of a man who suspected his day was about to get significantly more interesting. The Galactic Council? Never heard of them. Are they local? Negative, sir. The signal originated from approximately 15,000 light-years away. And, sir, they're asking for military assistance. Tank's eyebrows climbed toward his hairline. In his 23 years of military service, he'd learned that when aliens you've never heard of start asking for help, it usually means someone bigger and nastier is making life difficult for them. 15 minutes later, Tank found himself in Conference Room Alpha with the Joint Chiefs, watching a holographic alien with too many eyes explain how his fancy galactic civilization was getting systematically demolished by what appeared to be space Romans with anger management issues. So let me get this straight, interrupted General Patricia Bulldozer Williams, leaning back in her chair with the kind of smile that made enemy generals reconsider their life choices. This Galactic Council, which has never bothered to contact us before, is now asking for help because they're losing a war to lizard people. The alien ambassador's response carried the desperate tone of someone who had run out of better options. The Zephyrian Empire poses a threat to all civilized species in the galaxy. We are prepared to offer significant compensation for military assistance. Admiral Janet Pressure Cooker Martinez, Tank's second-in-command, snorted with barely contained amusement. Compensation. Right. And what exactly makes you think we'd be any more effective than your combined fleets? Your species has demonstrated remarkable tactical creativity in previous conflicts. Tactical creativity, General Williams repeated slowly. Is that what we're calling it now? Tank studied the tactical displays showing Zephyrian fleet movements. The patterns were clean, efficient, and mind-numbingly predictable. Classic overwhelming force doctrine with textbook orbital superiority tactics. It was the kind of military strategy that worked great against civilized opponents who played by established rules. Unfortunately for the Zephyrians, humans had never been particularly interested in playing by anyone else's rules. General Williams, do we have any assets in the Outer Rim sectors? Tank asked, his tone carrying the kind of casual interest that made his subordinates nervous. We've got Captain Martinez's task force finishing up some pirate suppression operations near the Centauri colonies. Nothing major, just a few dozen ships. Tank's smile could have powered a small space station. Perfect. Send Captain Riley Martinez my compliments and inform her that she's been volunteered for a diplomatic mission. The alien ambassador perked up with something approaching hope. You will provide assistance? Oh, we'll provide assistance, Tank assured him. The question is whether you'll still want it after you see how we operate. 3 hours later, Captain Riley Chaos Martinez received her new orders while her ship, the UES Havoc, was still smoking from their latest encounter with pirate vessels. Her crew had just finished what she euphemistically called aggressive salvage operations. When the priority transmission arrived, Riley read through the briefing twice, then started laughing. Her tactical officer, Commander Jake Boom Peterson, looked up from his console with concern. Captain, should I be worried about that particular laugh? Jake, my friend, we just got invited to a galactic war. Riley's grin was the kind that made enemy commanders start updating their wills. Apparently some fancy alien alliance is getting spanked by lizard people, and they want us to help. Define help. Help. The fun kind. Get me Lieutenant Torres, Chief Kowalski, and Sergeant Murphy. And Jake? Break out the good ammunition. We're going to make some new friends. As the human task force prepared to depart for parts unknown, Admiral Tank Thompson filed his report with characteristic understatement. Military assistance requested by Allied forces, dispatching available assets to provide tactical support. What he didn't mention was that humanity's idea of tactical support bore about as much resemblance to conventional military doctrine as a chainsaw bore to a butter knife. The Galactic Council was about to learn that sometimes, getting exactly what you ask for is the last thing you actually want. The Andorian system was having what local military historians would later describe as a very bad day. Zephyrian battlecruisers hung in orbit like metallic vultures, systematically reducing the planetary defense grid to expensive space debris. The combined Galactic Council fleet, what remained of it, huddled behind the system's outer moon, licking their wounds and trying to figure out how to lose with dignity. Admiral Zerfon's flagship bridge resembled the aftermath of a particularly violent temper tantrum. Sparks flew from damaged consoles, the air reeked of burned electronics, and half his crew was working with bandaged appendages. "Status report," he growled, though he suspected he didn't want to hear the answer. "Orbital platforms 7 through 12 are offline. The Zephyrians have established complete orbital superiority. Our remaining forces are insufficient for a counterattack." His tactical officer delivered the news with the enthusiasm of someone reading obituaries. "And the humans?" "No contact yet, sir. Although long-range sensors are detecting some unusual energy signatures approaching from the outer system." Zerfon's species didn't believe in prayer, but he was beginning to understand the appeal. The humans were their last hope, which was roughly equivalent to hoping for rescue from a pack of caffeinated wolverines. That's when reality decided to take a left turn into the bizarre. The UES Havoc dropped out of hyperspace approximately 3 kilometers from Admiral Zerfon's flagship, violating every known protocol about safe approach distances, fleet formations, and basic common sense. It was followed by 37 other human vessels, each one apparently designed by someone who thought traditional military aesthetics were for quitters. Captain Riley Martinez's voice crackled across the communication channels with the kind of cheerful confidence that made seasoned military officers reach for antacids. "Andorian Command, this is Captain Martinez of the Human Expeditionary Force. We understand you folks are having some lizard trouble." Admiral Zerfon stared at his communication console as if it had just sprouted legs and started dancing. "Captain Martinez, this is Admiral Zerfon. We were expecting a larger force." "Oh, don't worry about that. We brought enough." Riley's laugh carried the kind of ominous undertone that suggested her definition of enough might be slightly different from everyone else's. "Permission to come aboard. We should probably coordinate our attack strategies." 20 minutes later, Admiral Zerfon found himself face-to-face with Captain Riley Martinez and her senior staff. If he'd been expecting polished military professionals, he was about to be severely disappointed. Captain Martinez looked like she'd gotten dressed in the dark during an earthquake. Her uniform was regulation in the sense that it contained most of the required pieces, though several appeared to have been modified with a philosophy of function over form. She had the kind of smile that suggested she found the universe personally amusing. Commander Jake Peterson, her tactical officer, was built like a siege engine and had apparently decided that military grooming standards were more of a suggestion than a requirement. Lieutenant Sofia Torres, the communications officer, was currently eating what appeared to be a sandwich while taking notes on a handheld device. Chief Engineer Kowalski looked like he'd been recently electrocuted, which might have been accurate. Sergeant Murphy, their Marine commander, had the 1,000-yard stare of someone who'd seen too much combat and enjoyed it more than was psychologically healthy. "So," Riley said, settling into a chair without being invited, "let's talk about these Zephyrians. From what we've observed, they're using pretty standard overwhelming force doctrine. Establish orbital superiority, eliminate defensive positions, rinse and repeat." Admiral Zerfon nodded gravely. "Their tactics are highly effective. We have been unable to counter their numerical advantage." "Right, that's your first problem." Commander Peterson looked up from a tactical display with the expression of someone who'd just spotted an obvious mistake. "You're trying to fight them like they're a conventional military force." "They are a conventional military force." "Exactly," Lieutenant Torres added, pausing mid-bite of her sandwich. "That's why they're so easy to mess with." Admiral Zerfon felt a migraine coming on, and his species didn't even get migraines. "I'm afraid I don't understand." Captain Martinez's grin widened. "Admiral, let me ask you something. When you engage the Zephyrians, what do? We deploy our forces in standard battle formations, attempt to establish tactical superiority, and engage enemy vessels according to established military doctrine. And how's that working out for you?" The smoldering wreckage of half the Andorian defense fleet provided its own answer. "Here's the thing about conventional tactics," Riley continued, leaning forward with the enthusiasm of someone about to share a particularly good joke. "They work great when everyone agrees to play by the same rules. But we've never been big on following other people's rules. Chief Kowalski spoke up for the first time, his voice carrying the authority of someone who'd personally violated several laws of physics. "Captain, should I prep the special packages?" "Not yet, Chief. Let's see how they react to a basic probe first." Admiral Fawn had the growing suspicion that his definition of basic probe and the human's definition were about as compatible as matter and antimatter. He was right. The first indication that humanity's approach to warfare might be slightly unconventional came when Captain Martinez requested a complete psychological profile of Emperor Threk, on tactical assessments of Zephyrian command structure, and something called a really good sound system. Admiral Fawn provided the first two. The third request left him staring at his communication console in bewilderment. "You want audio equipment for a military engagement? Trust me on this one," Riley replied, her tone carrying the kind of casual confidence that made experienced officers question their sanity. Psychological warfare is 50% preparation and 50% presentation. The briefing that followed would later be studied in military academies across the galaxy as either a masterpiece of unconventional strategy or evidence that humans were too insane to be allowed near advanced weaponry. Commander Peterson pulled up a holographic display showing Zephyrian fleet movements. "Okay, so here's what we're dealing with. The Zephyrians use a classic hammer and anvil approach. Overwhelming force, predictable formations, textbook execution." "Textbook execution is the key phrase here," Lieutenant Torres added, finishing her sandwich and wiping her hands on her uniform. "They've got standard operating procedures for everything. Fleet engagement protocols, orbital bombardment sequences, even surrender negotiations. It's all very organized and civilized." Admiral Fawn nodded. "Their efficiency is precisely what makes them so dangerous." "No," Chief Kowalski interrupted, looking up from a technical manual he'd been annotating with what appeared to be crayon. "Their efficiency is what makes them vulnerable." "Explain." Captain Martinez stood up and began pacing, which in the confined space of the briefing room looked more like controlled bouncing. "Admiral, what's the Zephyrian response to a standard flanking maneuver? They redeploy their screening forces to counter the flanking elements while maintaining formation integrity. And if you target their command vessel, they transfer command authority to the designated backup vessel and continue operations according to established protocols." "Right. So they've got procedures for everything, which means they've got expectations for everything." Riley's smile was approaching dangerous levels of enthusiasm. "But what happens when you do something that isn't in their playbook?" Admiral Fawn considered this. His species had evolved advanced reasoning capabilities over millions of years, but human logic seemed to operate on principles that violated several fundamental laws of rational thought. "I'm not certain I follow. Let me give you an example." Sergeant Murphy spoke up, his voice carrying the weary tone of someone who'd participated in too many of Captain Martinez's examples. 3 months ago, we encountered a pirate fleet using standard convoy raiding tactics. 47 ships, good coordination, solid battle doctrine. How did you counter their numerical advantage? "We didn't." Commander Peterson grinned. "We convinced them to counter their own numerical advantage." "That's impossible." "That's what they said." Lieutenant Torres pulled up a mission report. "Right up until they started shooting at each other." Admiral Fawn's primary eyes focused on the display while his secondary eyes studied the humans with growing alarm. "You manipulated them into attacking their own forces?" "Psychological warfare at its finest," Captain Martinez confirmed. "We broadcasted fake communications suggesting that some of their ships were planning to betray the others. Added a little creative signal interference, some misleading sensor data, and let paranoia do the heavy lifting." "But that's Admiral Fawn struggled to find the appropriate word. "Effective?" Chief Kowalski suggested helpfully. "Brilliant?" added Lieutenant Torres. "Completely insane?" offered Sergeant Murphy. "All of the above," Riley concluded. "The point is, Admiral, conventional tactics only work against conventional thinking. The Zephyrians have conquered half the galaxy using the same approach every time because everyone keeps trying to beat them at their own game. So what do you propose?" Captain Martinez's expression shifted from amused to predatory. "We don't play their game. We don't follow their rules. We make them so confused, frustrated, and paranoid that they defeat themselves." Commander Peterson activated another display showing the current Zephyrian positions. Look at their formation. Perfect spacing. Optimal fire zones, textbook positioning. They're expecting you to attack their flanks or try to break through their center. What are you going to do instead? We're going to make them think we're attacking their flanks, their center, their rear, and possibly their own home planet all at the same time, Riley explained. And, while they're trying to figure out what the hell we're actually doing, we're going to hit them where they least expect it. Which is? When everywhere else. Admiral Zerfon realized he was developing what humans would call a headache. I'm not sure our forces are equipped for such unconventional tactics. That's okay, Captain Martinez assured him. You don't need to do anything unconventional. Just keep doing exactly what you've been doing. But that hasn't been working. Exactly. That's what makes it perfect. Riley's logic seemed to operate on principles that violated causality itself. The Zephyrians expect you to change tactics because you've been losing. When you don't change, they'll assume it's a trick and start overthinking their responses. Meanwhile, Chief Kowalski added with the expression of someone about to commit acts of violence against basic engineering principles. We'll be implementing what we technically call Plan B. What's Plan B?
The humans exchanged glances that suggested Plan B involved activities that would make sane species reconsider their life choices. You probably don't want to know, Sergeant Murphy said with the authority of experience. Admiral Zerfon was beginning to suspect that asking for human assistance might have been a mistake. A very large, very dangerous mistake that was about to make everyone's life significantly more complicated. He was absolutely right.
The Battle of Andorian Prime began at 0400 local time with what Admiral Zerfon would later describe as the most confusing 30 seconds of my military career, followed immediately by the most terrifying 6 hours of my natural life. It started when Captain Martinez broadcast a message to the entire Zephyrian fleet. Not a surrender demand or tactical ultimatum, but what appeared to be a recipe for something called cosmic brownies. Delivered in 17 different alien languages, including 3 that the Zephyrians had never heard of. Emperor Thrak-Zon, commanding the Zephyrian assault from his flagship, the Inevitable Conquest, stared at his communication console with the expression of someone who suspected the universe was playing a practical joke on him. Communications Officer Vextal, please confirm that the human fleet just transmitted confectionery instructions to our entire battle group. Confirmed, Your Imperial Magnificence. The transmission included detailed measurements, baking temperatures, and something called the secret ingredient is love. Are they attempting to surrender using some primitive cultural ritual? Unknown, sir. Should we respond according to standard first contact protocols? Before Emperor Thrak-Zon could answer, the second phase of humanity's master plan kicked into high gear. Chief Kowalski had spent the previous 6 hours modifying the human fleet's sensor arrays to broadcast what he euphemistically called creative electromagnetic signatures. To Zephyrian sensors, it appeared that the 38 human ships had suddenly multiplied into approximately 300 vessels, all moving in different directions and apparently violating several laws of physics. Tactical Officer Ralthon, report on enemy fleet composition. Sir, sensors indicate the human force has expanded. Current count suggests between 250 and 400 vessels, but the readings are inconsistent. Inconsistent how? Several ships appear to be occupying the same spatial coordinates. Others are registering as being in multiple locations simultaneously. And sir, at least 12 vessels appear to be traveling backwards through time. Emperor Thrak-Zon's headache was approaching legendary proportions. That's impossible. Yes, sir. Should we engage according to standard protocols? That's when Phase 3 commenced. Sergeant Murphy had convinced Captain Martinez to let him try something he called aggressive boarding action psychology. This involved launching what appeared to be assault shuttles toward the Zephyrian fleet, each one broadcasting a different message on open channels. The first shuttle transmitted what sounded like a war cry, but was actually Murphy reading his grocery list with tremendous enthusiasm. The second played what the Zephyrians assumed was intimidating battle music, but was actually Lieutenant Torres's collection of Earth's greatest polka hits. The third broadcast a detailed technical manual for lawn mower maintenance, delivered in the style of an epic poem. Sir, the human assault craft are transmitting what appears to be. Tactical Officer Ralthon paused, clearly struggling with the translation. Psychological warfare techniques of unprecedented sophistication. by the transmissions. For the next 3 minutes, the bridge of the inevitable conquest was filled with the sound of Sergeant Murphy enthusiastically describing his need to purchase milk and bread, accompanied by an accordion-heavy musical soundtrack and dramatic recitations about carburetor maintenance. Your Imperial Magnificence, how should we respond to these tactics? Emperor Thraxon had conquered 47 star systems using conventional military doctrine. He had studied the strategic principles of every major galactic civilization. He had prepared for every known form of warfare. He had not prepared for humans. Phase 4 began when Commander Peterson initiated what the humans called dynamic target selection. Instead of attacking the Zephyrian fleet directly, he began targeting empty space around their formations with increasingly elaborate weapon displays. To external observers, it looked like the humans were conducting the galaxy's most expensive fireworks show. Energy beams traced complex patterns through the void, missile strikes detonated in perfect geometric formations, and torpedo spreads created what could only be described as abstract art. The Zephyrians, meanwhile, found themselves desperately trying to figure out what the humans were actually aiming at.
Are they missing deliberately?
Unknown, sir. Tactical analysis suggests either complete incompetence or unprecedented sophistication. Which is more likely? Tactical Officer Ralthon considered this question while watching a squadron of human fighters execute what appeared to be synchronized swimming maneuvers around a Zephyrian destroyer. Sir, I honestly have no idea. That's when Captain Martinez initiated the final phase of what she had started calling Operation Complete Bewilderment. All ships, this is Havoc Actual. Execute Plan Banana. Did she just say Plan Banana? Admiral Zerfon asked his communications officer. Confirmed, sir. Plan Banana is now in effect. Plan Banana, as it turned out, involved every human vessel simultaneously broadcasting different pieces of what appeared to be a complex mathematical equation. The catch was that the equation, when solved, spelled out surrender now, or we'll really get creative and in ancient Zephyrian hieroglyphics. Emperor Thraxon, who held advanced degrees in military strategy, xenobiology, and interstellar economics, found himself staring at a tactical display that made absolutely no sense whatsoever. The human fleet was everywhere and nowhere, attacking nothing and everything, following patterns that seemed to violate causality itself. More importantly, his own forces were beginning to panic. Sir, the 5th Battle Group is requesting permission to withdraw. They report that human forces are using incomprehensible tactical doctrine, and they're concerned about unpredictable escalation. What's their tactical assessment? Wrote, we have no idea what they're doing, but whatever it is, we don't want to find out what comes next. Emperor Thraxon realized he was facing a fundamental problem. His forces were trained to counter every known form of military strategy. They were not trained to counter opponents who appeared to be making it up as they went along while somehow maintaining perfect coordination. Communications. Open a channel to the human fleet commander. Captain Martinez here. Having fun yet? I demand to know your tactical objectives. Our tactical objective is to make you ask questions like that. That makes no sense. Exactly. You're starting to get it. Emperor Thraxon surrendered 17 minutes later, not because his forces had been defeated, but because he was no longer certain that victory over humans would be worth the psychological trauma. The Galactic Council would spend the next several years trying to figure out exactly what had happened. The humans, meanwhile, celebrated with something they called Victory Pizza and started planning their next diplomatic mission. 3 days after the Battle of Andorian Prime, Admiral Zerfon found himself sitting in what had once been the Zephyrian Command Center, watching Captain Martinez and her crew consume what appeared to be their own body weight in various human snack foods while casually reorganizing galactic politics.
So Riley said around a mouthful something called cosmic pretzels. Turns out Emperor Thraxon is actually pretty reasonable once you get past all the megalomaniacal conquest stuff. Who knew?
The former emperor in question sat in the corner, still trying to process what had happened to his unstoppable war machine. Every few minutes he would mutter something about incomprehensible tactical doctrine, and stare into the middle distance with the expression of someone who had gazed into the abyss and found it doing interpretive dance. Commander Peterson looked up from a tactical analysis he'd been working on. The real problem was that his entire military doctrine was based on predictable enemy responses. Once we stopped being predictable, The whole system broke down. You stopped being predictable by becoming completely incomprehensible, Admiral Fawn pointed out. There's a significant difference. Is there, though? Lieutenant Torres asked, opening what appeared to be her 7th bag of chips. I mean, the end result was the same. Chief Kowalski raised his hand while simultaneously dismantling a Zephyrian sensor array, just to see how it worked. From an engineering perspective, their technology is actually pretty impressive. Very efficient, well-designed, completely practical. Unlike ours? Sergeant Murphy asked with amusement. Our stuff works on what I like to call aggressive improvisation and the fundamental principle that if you hit something hard enough, it usually does what you want. Admiral Fawn had been hoping for some insight into human military philosophy that might help him write his post-battle reports. Instead, he was beginning to understand that human military philosophy appeared to be try stuff and see what happens. Captain Martinez, the Galactic Council, is requesting a formal debriefing on your tactical innovations. Riley nearly choked on her pretzel. Tactical innovations? We just did what felt right at the time. You coordinated a fleet action involving 38 vessels across multiple phases of unconventional warfare while maintaining perfect operational security. Well, when you put it like that, it sounds way more impressive than it actually was. How was it actually? Mostly we just argued about what would confuse the enemy the most, then did all of it simultaneously. Commander Peterson nodded in agreement. The trick is maintaining enough coordination to be effective while staying random enough to be unpredictable. It's like jazz, but with explosions. Admiral Fawn realized that his species' entire educational system might need revision. And this approach works consistently? Define consistently, Sergeant Murphy said while examining a Zephyrian sidearm with professional interest. We've never lost a battle using these methods. How many battles have you fought using these methods? This was the first one. The silence that followed was broken only by the sound of Chief Kowalski successfully reverse engineering a quantum targeting computer using what appeared to be spare parts from a crude processor. So you're telling me, Admiral Fawn said slowly, that you defeated the most feared military force in the galaxy using tactics you invented 3 days ago? Technically, we invented them about 6 hours ago, Riley corrected. The first 3 days were just planning to make it up as we went along. And this worked because nobody expects the Spanish Inquisition, Lieutenant Torres said helpfully. I don't know what that means. Neither did the Zephyrians. That's why it worked. Admiral Fawn felt his understanding of military strategy crumbling like a cookie in a black hole. The Galactic Council is going to want to formalize these tactics into standard operating procedures.
The humans exchanged glances that suggested this was possibly the worst idea in galactic history.
Admiral, Captain Martinez said gently, the whole point is that they don't become standard. The moment you make them predictable, they stop working. Then how do we train other forces to use them? You don't. Every situation requires completely different approaches. What worked against the Zephyrians won't work against the next threat. So what will you do when the next threat appears? Riley's grin suggested that she was looking forward to finding out. We'll figure something out. We always do. 3 months later, the Galactic Council officially recognized humanity as a strategic military partner, which was diplomatic language for we have no idea what they're doing. But we're terrified of making them angry. The Zephyrian Empire became a surprisingly peaceful member of the galactic community, mostly because Emperor Thrakzon had developed what his therapists called acute human phobia and refused to engage in any activity that might attract their attention. Other potentially aggressive civilizations throughout the galaxy quietly shelved their expansion plans after reading the classified reports about the Battle of Andorian Prime. The reports were classified not because they contained sensitive tactical information, but because nobody believed they were real. Captain Martinez and her crew returned to their routine patrol duties, leaving behind a galaxy that was slightly more peaceful and significantly more confused than before. Admiral Fawn never did figure out how to write his post-battle report. Eventually, he just submitted a single line: the humans have tactics that work for reasons that don't. The Galactic Council accepted this as a perfectly reasonable military assessment. After all, they had asked for backup, and humanity had sent them something far worse than they could have possibly imagined. Something effective.